Have you ever looked in the mirror, seeing a successful, wealthy person, admired by the world, yet in their eyes, only a cold emptiness? Have you ever asked yourself, I have everything, why do I still feel like something is missing, something I can't even name? Ethan Scott, 38, is the shining star of New York's legal world. He has everything: fame, money, status, and admiration. But tonight, in his lavish apartment, Ethan sits alone, clutching an old letter, reading over and over again the trembling words, "If you are reading this letter, it means you found your brother." Just one sentence, one secret buried for nearly 40 years, is enough to shatter the perfect world Ethan had built over the years. And from here, his life will take an unexpected turn. Ethan Scott is a name that graces the covers of law, business, and even luxury lifestyle magazines. At only 38, he is a senior partner at New York's most prestigious law firm, with a client list full of billionaires, politicians, and the most powerful figures in the country. Every morning, he wakes up in his penthouse apartment on the 50th floor, where the floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic view of the city, and the sunrise lights up every corner of his meticulously decorated room. But what few know is this: Ethan often wakes up in the middle of the night, cold sweat running down his back, heart racing, staring blankly at the dark ceiling. He doesn't understand why. Everyone thinks he's the perfect man, wealthy, successful, handsome, and smart. But in his own mind, Ethan feels an empty void, as though something important is missing. There are moments when he stands before the bathroom mirror, gazing at his weary reflection, and asks himself, I've done everything to get here, but who am I living for? For my father? For my career? Or for myself? Friends often invite Ethan to lavish parties and events, but he usually makes excuses to stay home, sitting alone with a glass of fine wine. On those long nights, Ethan often hears the sound of ambulance sirens, distant train whistles, and the tapping of raindrops on the windows, feeling an indescribable sadness. He lacks nothing, yet he never feels fulfilled. No one sees the look in his eyes as he stares out the window, as if searching for something he doesn't even understand. And every time he closes his eyes to sleep, a strange dream keeps repeating. An invisible hand reaches out to him, but when he tries to grasp it, it vanishes like smoke. Ethan grew up in a family where honor, achievements, and perfection were everything. His father, William Scott, was one of the most renowned lawyers of his generation, a man of steel who never showed emotions. He never spoke about Ethan's mother, except for one occasion when Ethan, as a child, asked, "Where's Mom, Dad?" William simply replied, "Your mother was weak. She couldn't handle it." Ethan learned early to stay silent. Every time he fell off his bike, his father didn't rush to help but merely crossed his arms and said, "Get up, son. No one's going to help you." Whenever Ethan brought home imperfect grades, his father would frown and say, "Good isn't enough. You have to be the best." The house Ethan grew up in was full of award certificates, medals, and commendations, but there was no laughter, no hugs, no words of comfort. While other children had mothers who told them bedtime stories, Ethan only had extra homework and the cold stare of his father. While other kids cried when they were bullied, Ethan learned to clench his fists and swallow his tears. He became a person no one could hurt, a steel-hearted warrior. But at the same time, Ethan also became someone who didn't know how to be vulnerable, how to share, how to love himself. In his heart, there was always an unanswered question: if his mother had been alive, would she have hugged him? Would she have told him he had done enough? But Ethan never dared to ask his father about this. He feared that if he touched that pain, it would consume both of them. And so, he continued to race forward, striving for perfection, to fill the void he didn't dare face. That afternoon, Ethan was leaving court after a tense trial. His phone buzzed, a message from his assistant saying that there was an envelope from a strange law office. Ethan frowned. Who could be sending him something? When he got home, he set down his briefcase and opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of yellowed papers. Some hospital records, a birth certificate, and a handwritten letter. Ethan's heart raced. A letter from his mother. But she had passed away when he was just a baby, right? His hands trembled as he lifted the paper, reading the soft, flowing words, "Dear Ethan, my beloved child whom I never had the chance to hold in my arms." He felt as though the world had tilted. He read each sentence, each word, as if swallowing the tears of the woman he had never met. In that moment, Ethan's heart melted. He was no longer the cold-hearted lawyer, he was just a child. Hearing his mother call his name from the other side of life, Ethan froze when he read the line. A brother? Noah. The unfamiliar name made his heart race. His mother told him that she had given birth to twins, but due to family pressure, she was forced to leave one at the hospital and send it to an orphanage. Noah, a brother he had never known, never heard of, yet shared the same blood, the same breath. Ethan stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth, his heart pounding. It felt as if his entire life had been flipped upside down. He thought he was the only one, the center of all expectations, all sacrifices. But now he realized, he was only half. Half of the story. Half of his mother's heart, which had been painfully torn in two to protect both of them. Ethan closed his eyes and imagined Noah's face. Who was he? Where was he? Had he ever known about Ethan? That question pricked at Ethan's heart like 1,000 needles, making it impossible for him to sit still. Ethan collapsed into the chair, his hands clutching his head. The luxurious room suddenly felt small and suffocating. The paintings on the walls, the expensive items, the glittering awards, they all seemed meaningless. He looked back at his life, all those years of striving, all those years of proving he was the perfect son, all for what? He laughed, a hoarse, painful laugh. It turned out there was someone else who should have been with him all those years. Someone who should have shared in the laughter, the fears, the moments of weakness. Ethan felt deceived, not only by his father but by life itself. He felt empty, as though he had lost his foundation. Alone in his cold apartment, Ethan whispered, "Noah. Where are you?" And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt he was no longer strong. That whole night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He flipped through the papers, each line of writing. Noah Scott, same birth date, same hospital. A cold note read, the family could not afford to raise both. Ethan clenched the paper tightly, tears streaming down his face. A whirlwind of thoughts raged in his mind. How had Noah lived? Who had raised him? Had he ever thought of Ethan? Ethan went online. Searching for records, tracing every lead. He saw the names of the families who had adopted Noah, saw fragments of information. But the more he searched, the heavier his heart grew. Everything he thought he knew about life, about family, turned out to be only half the truth. Ethan leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Noah. I will find you. I promise." And for the first time, Ethan knew that the true journey of his life, the journey to find his lost brother, was just beginning, Ethan couldn't sit still. From the moment he held the file in his hands, his heart kept pounding loudly, like a drumbeat urging him forward. A twin brother. A lost part of his soul, gone for so many years. Ethan didn't know where to begin, but he decided, nothing could stop him from uncovering the truth. He hired a private investigator, scoured hospital records, orphanage files, adoption papers. Every night, Ethan sat by the window of his luxurious apartment, gazing at the sparkling city below, but his heart felt empty. He imagined a boy. Born at the same time as him, with the same bloodline, but raised in a different world. One day, the investigator called. "Ethan, I found him." Ethan could hardly breathe. His name is Noah. He was adopted by a family in a small town about 300 miles away. They aren't wealthy, they're farmers. But Noah, he had some trouble. Ethan swallowed hard. What kind of trouble? The investigator spoke slowly, as if afraid of making Ethan panic. He went to prison. A fight when he was young. It was just impulsive, not a major crime, but he was sentenced to 2 years. Ethan froze. His brother, while he went to private school, drove luxury cars, had to serve time for a fight. Ethan gripped the phone tightly. His mind spinning, he wondered, if he had grown up there, would he have become Noah? If Noah had been given the opportunities he had, would he have become a successful entrepreneur? Ethan understood that life had been unfair from the start. He began to arrange his work, preparing to drive. His heart was both eager and terrified. He didn't know if Noah would want to meet him. He didn't know what he would say. But Ethan knew one thing, he couldn't turn back. He couldn't live his whole life without meeting the brother that fate had stolen from him. Ethan received the first photo. He opened the email, staring at the screen. The man in the photo wore an old dark shirt, holding a wrench, standing next to an old pickup truck. He was smiling, a warm, friendly smile, his eyes shining with simple joy. Ethan swallowed. How could this be? They looked so alike, yet one lived in a penthouse, and the other stood in the middle of an auto repair shop, surrounded by the smell of oil. Ethan touched his cheek, feeling the contours of his face, then looked back at Noah's picture. That entire night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked around the vast living room, examining the expensive items, the modern paintings, the fine wine glass. He suddenly realized, he didn't know anything about real life. He had never known how to hold a wrench, never fixed anything himself. He worked through screens, through phones, through numbers. Noah, on the other hand, worked with his hands, with effort, with sweat. Ethan wondered, did Noah think he was arrogant? A rich kid who fell from the sky, he chuckled softly, but the laugh felt empty. Sometimes, Ethan felt like he didn't belong anywhere. He had everything, money, status, connections, but he had never had anyone who truly understood him. The thought that there was someone out there who shared the same roots, the same starting story, made Ethan's heart ache. He didn't know what he was searching for, a connection, a redemption, forgiveness. He only knew that photo had changed everything. Ethan was no longer himself. That morning, Ethan drove out of the city. His black sports car sped down the highway, but his heart beat slowly, heavily. His hands gripped the steering wheel. Ethan breathed deeply, trying to push away the anxiety in his chest. The 300-mile journey seemed endless. Every time he looked in the rearview mirror, his own reflection stared back, but this time, he didn't just see Ethan, he saw Noah too. Finally, he arrived. A small, peaceful town, with narrow streets, old wooden houses, and a local cafe. Ethan parked by the side of the road, looking across to see the Noah's Garage sign. The wooden sign was peeling, and a few old cars were parked in front. But what made Ethan's heart race wasn't the scene, but the man who was crouched under the hood of a car, his hands covered in grease, his brows furrowed in concentration. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off him. It was him, but not him. It was the same face, the same features, the same build, but with a completely different aura. Simplicity, approachability, warmth. Ethan felt his knees shake slightly. He hadn't expected to be this nervous. After years of doing business, negotiating, signing million-dollar contracts, he had never felt his hands sweat like this. Ethan wondered, should he turn back? Was everything too crazy? But then, a part of him whispered, "No, you've come this far, you can't give up now." Ethan stepped out of the car, standing still under the midday sun. He didn't know where to begin. He didn't know whether to call out, walk over, or just stand there. But at the moment Noah looked up, their eyes met. And the world seemed to stop. Noah furrowed his brow, staring at the stranger. Then his eyes widened, his mouth slightly parted, and the wrench fell to the ground with a small sound. Noah took a step back, his greasy hand trembling. Ethan felt his heart tighten. He didn't need to say anything, all the answers were clear on both their faces. Noah didn't know he had a twin brother. His whole life, he had grown up thinking he was an only child, never knowing there was someone out there who looked just like him. Ethan swallowed, forcing a small smile, but he felt foolish. This wasn't something that could be explained in a few minutes. Noah looked at Ethan as though he were looking into a distorted mirror, an image that couldn't exist. They stood there, silent, amidst the sounds of birds singing, cars passing by, leaves rustling. Ethan felt the air grow thick. He wanted to step forward, to say, "I'm Ethan. I'm your brother." But his mouth felt stiff, unable to form the words. Ethan realized, everything he had prepared for this trip hadn't helped at all. Reality was always messier and more surprising than any plan. Finally, Noah spoke first. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, both cautious and confused. Ethan took a deep breath. I'm Ethan. I think we're brothers." Noah laughed, the laugh awkward, disbelieving. "Brothers? What kind of joke is this? I don't have any siblings." Ethan scratched his head, embarrassed. He pulled the file out of his pocket and handed it to Noah. "I know this sounds crazy. But here's the paperwork, the adoption records, the DNA test. I just found out recently." Noah looked at the papers, then back at Ethan. "What kind of joke is this? Are you some rich guy from the city? Why are you looking for me?" Ethan smiled sadly. "I don't know. I had to meet you. I couldn't not come." They fell silent. Ethan felt like he was standing on the edge, one wrong step and everything would fall apart. Noah crossed his arms, looking down at the ground, lips pressed tight. Ethan wanted to ask, "Are you happy? Have you ever thought about your real family?" But he didn't dare. The meeting lasted over an hour, but mostly consisted of short, disconnected sentences. Ethan briefly told his story, his journey to find Noah. Noah sat and listened, his eyes distant, still in disbelief. Ethan understood, no one could believe such a shock right away. They were both grown men, carrying too many scars, too many memories. It wouldn't be easy to bridge the gap of decades apart with just a few words. Before leaving, Ethan took out a business card and handed it to Noah. "If you want, call me." His voice was softer now. Noah took the card, his fingers lightly brushing the edge of the paper. He looked at Ethan, his eyes still full of doubt, but with a glimmer of curiosity, of hope. Ethan nodded, offering a small, awkward smile, then turned and walked back to his car. On the drive back, Ethan felt the weight in his heart. He wondered, did he do the right thing? Should he have appeared so suddenly, disrupting the life of a stranger? Ethan looked at the leftover card in the box, sighed. He didn't know if Noah would call. He didn't know if Noah wanted to stay in touch. But at least he had tried. He had stepped out of his comfort zone, facing his greatest fear, rejection. Ethan knew, this journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. And no matter the outcome, he couldn't go back to being an indifferent person, only caring about himself. Ethan realized there were things more important than success, more important than money. Those are the connections, the invisible threads that tie lost souls together. Whatever the result, he had begun walking the path to find the part of his soul he never knew he had lost. Ethan couldn't sleep all night. He sat on the sofa, staring at his own business card that he had left for Noah. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, nervousness, fear, and a heavy weight pressing on his chest. The next morning, Ethan drove straight to his father's house, a place where he had never asked the real questions. As soon as he entered his father's study, he went straight to the point. "Dad, why did I never know I had a brother?" His father was reading the newspaper, his face cold, his familiar look of disdain in his eyes. But this time, he lowered the newspaper, looked straight at Ethan, and erupted. "Don't ever mention that again. I gave him away a long time ago." His voice echoed throughout the room, making Ethan flinch. He had never heard his father so angry. Ethan tried to stay calm, pressing on, but why? Why has Dad kept this a secret all these years? His father jumped up, his eyes burning. "Because there's only room for one in this family. Don't you get it? One perfect child. One to carry on my legacy. That other one wasn't born to do anything." Ethan felt his body shake. Every word his father said was like a dagger, not just to Noah, but to Ethan himself. His entire life, the pride, the reputation, the success, it turned out to be nothing but a cold arrangement. Ethan left the house with a broken heart. He drove aimlessly, eventually stopping in front of the cemetery where his mother rested. Sitting by the grave, he placed his hand on the cold stone, whispering, "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" A tear silently rolled down his cheek. In that moment, a flood of memories rushed back. His mother's gentle smile, her distant eyes, the times she secretly wiped away tears when Ethan won awards, and the way she looked at his father with a resigned expression. Ethan slowly realized, it was his father who had forced his mother to give up Noah. His father wanted a perfect child, someone to carry on the law, to uphold the family name. Noah, with his mistakes and rebelliousness, did not fit into that picture. Ethan buried his face in his hands, feeling like the world he knew suddenly collapsed. His success was not just the result of his own efforts but of a ruthless sacrifice. Half of his soul had been torn away from day one. Back home, Ethan entered his luxurious apartment, but it felt strangely empty. The paintings on the wall, the certificates, the awards, all of them suddenly seemed dull. He sat on the floor, staring at the trophies on the shelf, feeling that they meant nothing anymore. Whose life have I been living? Ethan asked himself. For all these years, he thought he was the winner, the image of success, the pride of his family. But now, he realized, he was merely the product of a ruthless decision. Every time he stepped onto the podium of glory, somewhere out there, a brother with the same bloodline was collapsing, abandoned, forgotten. Ethan felt his heart ache. He had never felt so alone. A successful, wealthy man, but in reality, just a lucky one who was chosen, and the price of that was the division, the sacrifice of others. He buried his face on the floor, crying for the first time like a child. Meanwhile, in the small town, Noah sat alone in the garage, surrounded by the papers Ethan had left behind. The yellow light cast on his face, smeared with oil, weary, full of thought. Noah held the business card, flipping it over and over, reading the name Ethan Bennett and feeling a simmering anger rise within him. Why is he finding me now? Why do I have to learn about this after almost 30 years? Noah recalled his childhood, the days of wandering, the bullying, the times he sat in cold jail cells, wondering why his life had been so difficult. And now, he knew that somewhere, there was another person exactly like him, living a completely different life, all because of a decision he had never been asked about. Noah clenched the paper in his hand, his eyes welling up. He didn't know whether he was angry at Ethan, at his biological parents, or at the world. All that remained was a vast emptiness in his heart. That night, Ethan and Noah both returned to their mother's old house. They didn't speak much, simply walked in, their footsteps echoing in the empty room. The old photographs on the walls, their mother's gentle gaze from the past. Ethan bent down, picking up an old knitted scarf his mother had made, caressing it in his hands. Noah stood beside him, holding an old wooden toy, his eyes red. They both silently looked around, seeing the traces of a family that had been torn apart long ago. Ethan turned to Noah and softly said, "I miss Mom so much." Noah just nodded, unable to speak. They sat down on the floor, leaning on each other, feeling a bond they had never known before. In that quiet space, they realized that all the separations, all the anger, all the misunderstandings, had ultimately led them back to this place, the place where their hearts had always belonged. In the end, only the two of them remained in the old house. Ethan looked directly at Noah, his eyes red, his hands trembling. "Noah. I'm sorry," his voice cracked. "I didn't know. Really, I didn't know about this. But now I see. Everything I have, I took from you." Noah looked at Ethan, his eyes filled with anger, pain, and then softened. "I don't blame you," Noah whispered. "You had no choice." Ethan broke down in tears. The tears flowed freely, breaking the shell he had worn his whole life, the shell of a cold lawyer, a successful man, a strong person. Now, he was just a lost older brother, standing before a brother he had never known, asking for forgiveness. Noah stepped forward and placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Maybe," Noah said, "it's time for us to start over, as real brothers." In that moment, the two hearts that seemed so distant finally found each other. Ethan sat silently on the old wooden chair, listening to Noah speak in a deep, steady voice. Noah didn't embellish or complain. He just told his story, as though he were recounting a faded old book. He spoke about the Foster family, a poor, violent family where he grew up amidst beatings and insults. He talked about the times he ran away, sleeping on the streets, wandering through subway stations, stealing bread to survive. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat. But Noah didn't stop there. He spoke about his troubled youth, falling into gangs and getting arrested for theft. But in the darkness, he found a glimmer of light. Noah learned carpentry in prison, read books, and exercised. He said, "I realized I could stand up without anyone saving me." Ethan's eyes began to sting. He had always thought of himself as strong, but compared to Noah, he realized he was just wrapped in soft cotton. On the drive back, Ethan looked at Noah, the brother he had just found again, sitting next to him, his sunburned face, his hands full of calluses. Ethan thought about his luxurious penthouse in Manhattan, the wine parties, the prestigious lawyer job he had once been so proud of. He began to see them as hollow. Noah, who had nothing, was the one who understood kindness, forgiveness, and rising up after a fall. Ethan remembered the story of how Noah helped a young inmate break free from addiction or the times he used his meager wages to buy food for a homeless woman. Ethan thought to himself, if life were a contest, the real winner wouldn't be him. He began to wonder, how long had it been since he lived without forgetting who he truly was? Ethan never thought he would sit by a lake, holding a fishing rod, listening to the sound of the water and Noah's hearty laugh. Two men, one from glamorous Manhattan, the other from streets full of dust and violence, now sitting next to each other like two kids who had just met. They fixed Noah's old truck, covered in grease, and laughed when Ethan clumsily dropped the tool kit. They drank beer in the backyard, gazing at the starry sky, sharing bits of random memories, Noah talking about learning to ride a bike, Ethan remembering his first piano lesson. The seemingly unrelated lives began to merge into an unusual, warm picture. Ethan had never had a real brother. Now, he felt that this mattered more than any courtroom victory. When Ethan took Noah to a fancy New York party, many curious glances turned their way. Noah wore the suit Ethan had prepared for him, but his discomfort and stiffness were obvious. Ethan's old friends raised their eyebrows and whispered behind their backs, "Who's that? He looks so rough." Ethan felt all of it, but he didn't care. In a moment, when he introduced Noah to a major client, Ethan said proudly, "This is Noah, my brother. The only family I have left." Noah shyly smiled, his hand tightly gripping his wine glass. Ethan could see the insecurity in his eyes, but also the gratitude. That was the first time in Noah's life that he stood in a room where people looked at him as a human being. Not a criminal, a failure, or someone abandoned. Ethan knew that for this alone, he would be willing to give everything up. In Noah's garage, Ethan fumbled through learning how to change the spark plugs, clothes dirty, hair tousled. Noah patted him on the back and laughed, "Now you look like a real person." The evening spent together, Noah cracking jokes and telling stories, made Ethan laugh uncontrollably, laughter he hadn't known he'd forgotten. Ethan gradually let go of his polished exterior, the expensive ties, and the strategic conversations. He learned how to sit on the floor, eat cold pizza, listen to old rock music, and savor simple joys that didn't come from fame or money. Noah didn't lecture or preach philosophy. He just lived, and Ethan gradually became caught up in that rhythm, a life where no one had to play a role. One night, Ethan sat by the window of his apartment, staring at the brightly lit streets. On the table was a thick stack of files for a big lawsuit. He sighed, feeling weighed down. Lately, his mind kept circling around the question, what am I doing all of this for? Meeting Noah made him see another way of living, one where you didn't have to wear a mask, one where you didn't have to chase perfection. Ethan began to think about quitting his job as a lawyer, something that had once been a source of pride but now felt like a chain. He wanted to do something that truly brought joy and meaning, open a small cafe, write books, do charity work. Ethan smiled, for the first time in years, feeling the door to freedom crack open. He looked over at Noah, who was sitting there, diligently carving a small piece of wood into the shape of a heart. Ethan knew, the journey had just begun, but this time, he was not alone. After years of living in the shadows of painful memories, Ethan and Noah finally found a reason to stand up and do something meaningful. One morning, as they sat together in Noah's small house, their story, of abandoned and separated children, came rushing over them like a powerful wave. Ethan looked into Noah's bright eyes, and suddenly he said, "We can help children like us. Create a foundation, give them a chance, a family, love." Noah was silent for a long time, then he nodded. It was a monumental decision. They wanted to turn their pain into hope for other children, innocent children who had to suffer because of circumstances. That day, they began building a charity fund. They knew the journey would not be easy, but they were ready. No more hopeless views of life. They wanted to give, so that the children would never feel as alone and abandoned as they once did. When Ethan decided to publicly share his story, he knew there would be judgment, that some would not understand. But he was no longer afraid. They had come this far, and he had found freedom within himself. In front of the television camera, Ethan stood tall, looking straight into the lens, with no signs of anxiety. "Who am I?" he began, his voice firm. "I am a man with success, but behind all of that, I am a half left behind." These words were a powerful statement, not only to those watching him but also to himself. He no longer felt the need to hide his past. He spoke about Noah, the difficult life they had both lived, the losses, and the wounds that would never heal. Their story shook the public, not because of their fame, but because of their sincerity, their courage to face the past. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt that he could truly live as himself, no longer needing to be the perfect image of anyone. After their story became public, Noah was no longer the quiet man behind closed doors. He had stepped into the light, not because he sought attention, but because he understood that he could do something bigger, something that could help others find comfort and hope. In front of the crowd, Noah stood strong, his heart pounding as he spoke about forgiveness, not just with his father, but with himself. "We all can stumble," he began, his voice sincere, "but the important thing is, do we have the courage to stand up and keep going? I have fallen, I have made mistakes, but I don't allow myself to be trapped in that. And I believe you can do the same." These words were like a powerful gust of wind sweeping through the crowd. No one had expected a man once seen by society as a failure to stand on stage and speak of courage, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. Noah no longer needed to brag about his past. He simply lived truthfully, and that is what made him an inspiration. Their story went further than they had ever imagined. And even though their father refused to appear, Noah and Ethan decided to let it go. One day, a letter arrived, addressed to both of them. When they opened it, the words had faded, but every letter was like a cut to their hearts. Their father apologized, and in it was a late regret for the years he had abandoned them. Ethan and Noah sat down together, their eyes red as they read each line. They couldn't help but feel the pain when they thought about the years they were left behind, the days without their father by their side. But another feeling, a sense of peace, slowly spread through them. They no longer felt anger. Forgiveness wasn't because their father deserved it, but because they deserved freedom. Freedom from anger, freedom from the past. They had lived long enough to know that only forgiveness brings liberation. And in that moment, they understood that forgiveness was not just a gift for others, but a gift for themselves. They returned to the old house, where the painful memories had once been buried. Walking along the familiar path, Ethan and Noah didn't speak. They just walked, quietly. When they reached their mother's grave, they stood still, looking at the simple tombstone. No grand words. Just silence, filled with emotion. Ethan placed a flower on his mother's grave, and Noah did the same. They didn't speak, but in their eyes was an ocean of emotions. Ethan's flower was a gesture of gratitude, a thank you for giving him life, even though she could never be by his side long enough. Noah's flower was an apology, a thank you for her love despite her suffering, even though she could never protect him for life. After placing the flowers, they stood silently, looking at each other, no need for any more words. The wounds in their hearts began to heal, and finally, they knew that they had found something they once thought they had lost forever: mother's love, and brotherly love. As they stood before their mother's grave, that moment felt like a turning point in their lives. Ethan looked at Noah, his eyes filled with empathy and love. "I didn't know what I was missing," Ethan said, his voice softening, "but from now on, I won't miss another moment." These words were not just a promise to Noah, but a promise to himself. They had left the past behind and moved forward. Life was no longer a series of meaningless days. They had each other, and what mattered more than anything was that now they knew how to live authentically, love, and cherish every moment. Ethan and Noah no longer sought perfection. They just needed to live true to themselves, and that was something they had missed all these years. A year had passed since Ethan and Noah decided to change their lives. Ethan, who had once been deeply entrenched in his career as a lawyer in towering skyscrapers, had done something even he hadn't anticipated: he left his prestigious law firm. No more stressful meetings, no more big contracts that he had always craved. He wanted to live a different life, a life that truly mattered, one that would help the poor, the children in need. So, he opened a small office in Noah's town. The early days were not easy, but when he saw the smiles of those he had helped, he knew he had found the right path. It was the place where he felt peace and happiness, not because of fame or success, but because he knew he was doing the right thing. Working alongside Noah, witnessing the small but meaningful changes in the lives of the less fortunate, made him feel a completeness that he had never known before. This was how Ethan rebuilt his life, not just through work, but through the way he lived, the way he loved, and the way he helped others. Although their lives had changed, their brotherly bond remained strong. Ethan and Noah became a unique pair in the community. One was a lawyer, the other a mechanic, but they shared a common mission: to help the underprivileged. Together, they organized community events, raised funds for charitable activities, and helped those in need. The gatherings, the events filled with laughter and sharing, were the fruits of the strong brotherhood they had built through difficult times. No one expected that one successful lawyer and one simple mechanic could create such a powerful charitable career. But it was their partnership that created miracles. They became famous not only for their external successes but also for their open hearts and boundless spirit of helping others. They became symbols of change and humanity within their community. Their story was not just about careers, but about perseverance, brotherly love, and living a truly meaningful life. One late afternoon, as the two brothers sat together, drinking beer and watching the horizon, Ethan couldn't hold back his emotions. He turned to Noah, his gaze warm and full of gratitude. "You know," Ethan began, his voice low and emotional, "my life only truly started when I found you. Before that, I kept chasing after superficial things, but when I had you by my side, I finally understood what brotherhood is, what a real family is." Noah looked at him and smiled. He didn't say anything, but in his eyes, everything was clear. For Noah, he finally had a family. A family that wasn't just blood, but people who loved and cared for each other. This brotherhood had helped him heal the wounds in his heart and overcome all the struggles in his life. Though he had always felt lonely and abandoned before, now he had Ethan, and that was all he needed. Their life now was about connection, about walking together, not out of obligation, but because of sincere love. One day, when their charitable work had found its rhythm, and they had helped many people and built a strong community, the brothers decided to take some time for themselves. They drove Noah's old truck out of town, to a quiet place where they could watch the sunset. They climbed onto the roof of the truck, sat together in silence, and just gazed into the distance, where the sun was slowly setting. In that moment, there was no hustle and bustle of life, no noise of work, just the peace and stillness of two people who had found tranquility within themselves. They smiled, not because of anything special, but simply because they had each other, and they knew that life didn't need fame or status. Brotherhood, understanding, and love were all they needed. Despite the storms they had endured, they had finally found the most precious thing, peace in their hearts. In the quiet of that space, Ethan turned to Noah, and his words poured out from his heart. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked, "thank you for forgiving me. Because of you, I now understand what it means to live truly, what it means to love without trying to please anyone." At that moment, Noah said nothing, only looking at him with warm eyes, as if he already knew everything. He didn't need to say much, because he understood that true love didn't need words. But those words of thanks made them both realize something very important: they had truly forgiven each other, and that was what helped them grow. Helped them rebuild their relationship and face the challenges together. No more hatred, no more blame. Only sincere love. As the video began to fade, a line appeared on the screen: "Family is not about blood, it's about the people you find and never let go." That was the message Ethan and Noah wanted to send, not only to those watching their story, but also as a reminder of the true meaning of family. Family is not always the people who gave birth to you, but the ones you find, who help you overcome hardships, and share both joys and sorrows. And sometimes, true family is simply those you love and are willing to never let go of.